What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Sit Down Saturday. We're not going to waste too much time today. We're going to kind of get into it because of scheduling conflicts. But over the past couple weeks, you guys have noticed that this shelf populated with Legends class figures. And people were asking me, are you going to be buying Legends class figures now? And the answer was no. The no is because I was working on this video. I've been working on it for some time. I made a scale chart. Why did I make a scale chart? Because third-party Legends class figures are not working within the same scale. I've said this before and people have refuted it, so I am going to prove it once and for all. Let me give you a little bit of background information. Shout out to Mike L. He provided the scale charts. He's done these G1 scale charts. He sent me the files for all of them, and I've used his as the template. It's from the Sumbo. He's put countless time, energy, hours into it. It's accurate. I used that and created two backdrops, one for DX9 and one for Magic Square. I put them both at the appropriate place for Optimus Prime. I scaled everything to Prime, and then the lines below Optimus and above Optimus are done in perspective, in proportion, and in ratio to the measurements on the screen between those places. Or scale, not screen. So it's all accurate. Now, obviously, when I was drawing with the marker, the tip is fatter at some places, and, you know, there's a little bit of human error and stuff like that, but it's pretty accurate. So that's what we're using as a template when we start having this discussion. This has been fairly grueling. Shout out to everybody that sent figures. I've been working on it for some time. We're going to cover Iron Factory just to talk about their history a bit. We're going to cover Unique Toys briefly. We're going to talk about DX9, New Age, and Magic Square the most because they are the three basically operating within the same lane, representing the same scale of the same continuity. Iron Factory is pretty much all IDW. Unique Toys is maybe a done deal in regards to Legends class figures, so we have these three that are pretty much left. As a warning, I've put together the meat of this already, and it's dry. It's very dry, but it is interesting, and it does prove some points, some of which were even shocking to me. Some of which were, it's like, oh, okay, spoilers, New Age Jazz, I was like, it doesn't really work with this. It's like, okay, well, maybe it does, but then it doesn't work with this. It's one of those things. It's like, if you kind of, tilt your head a bit, you can make stuff work. It's then how that relates to other things within its same bar. When I say bar or line, I'm talking about the exact color line. It's like a deep blue, and then a purple, and then a green, and then a red, something like that. So, this is weeks and weeks and weeks, months actually, of work compiled into one video that's not as good as I wished it to be, but it does have the information. The information is in it. I hope that you find it informative. I hope that you can use this as a tool. That is its intention. It's not supposed to be a Bible. It's supposed to be for you to use, internalize, and then use as a tool for your own purchasing. And I don't care about it. So I was able to stay pretty objective. Let's begin.
So we'll start with Iron Factory. Why, you ask? Because they're my favorite third-party Legends class figure making company. That's just the facts. And the one thing that we have to point out about Iron Factory is that they went through a change of scale. If you look at Blaster all the way to your right, that was the original scale. It was one of the original figures released. But as you can see with him next to Sideswipe, it doesn't quite scale properly at all. They went through a bit of a change somewhere around the Overlord figure, I believe. Don't quote me on that. But once they settled in, they've pretty much kept it consistent. And the interesting thing about this is that once they changed to this new scale, the new scale is pretty much in line with DX9. Not so much in line with Magic Square, as illustrated. Now, speaking of DX9, they're no stranger to the change of scale either, and they started out early. They're one of the first third-party Legends class making figure companies. They started out with a couple of figures, but three of them were the Cyclonus, Scourge, and Galvatron, some of their earlier offerings, which all scaled with one another, but as you can see, does not scale at all with their Optimus. But their Optimus has pretty much settled into their new scale. Their new scale has been largely consistent. And we can get a good look at that here, where most figures line up almost perfectly with one another in regard to their scale chart. The Cup and the RC may not be perfect, but those two were also some of their super early offerings. Now, we all know that there's some sort of connection between Unique Toys and DX9. We've seen it over and over and over again. These were some of the Unique Toys offerings. They're not quite in the same scale, but they're pretty close. They're close enough, and most of them can get you by, but they are a bit off. This was their Headmaster offerings. Now, as we've spoken about in previous videos, DX9 and New Age are definitely connected. and they all seem to line up as well. And there's a shot of their Grimlock, which also scales pretty much perfectly. No need for oversized knockoffs. The originals will do just fine. Now, when you look at New Age, independently of any other company, they all are fairly consistent as well. We can see here between their Insecticons, a Mini-Bot, and a Car-Bot that they all pretty much line up accordingly. Which brings us to Magic Square. Magic Square, once again, offers a fairly unique scaling system across all their figures and seasons, with their deluxes, Voyagers, Leaders, etc. all sort of remaining consistent to and of one another, as illustrated. Now, when we add the Unique Toys bots to the list, you can see that they're not quite big enough. Chrome Dome and Mind Wipe are too small and line up more with Hoist and even Huffer than they do with Cyclonus or Optimus Prime. Expanding our boundaries to cover some New Age figures as well, and we start to see that some begin to work and some don't. It all kind of depends on how you view scale and how you view your mini-bots in regards to your larger figures. So let's slim it down to just the G1 offerings. This kind of works. If you have Magic Square for your larger figures, and then once you get to kind of deluxe style figures, you drop down to the New Age, that will work fairly well. With the exception of Huffer, who is now too big, because that's a mini-bot from Magic Square, and therefore breaks our rule of stopping at Voyager. For the sake of comparison, we'll add the DX9 Optimus to our look of Magic Square figures and New Age figures, and you see that he can kind of work with some of the larger bots and the smaller bots. So the primes are kind of swappable with a nod and a wink. The problem comes into play when we start looking at the deluxes and the mini bots. So let's look at the Magic Square scaling. We'll use DX9's Optimus. He still works well with the DX9 Grimlock, so no issue there. However, when we look at Sideswipe, he's now significantly larger than Jazz, who sits almost eye to eye with Huffer. This is where the scale really begins to fall apart. Just to drive this home a bit more, here is DX9's scale with Optimus from Magic Square mixed in, Cosmos from Magic Square mixed in, and Sideswipe from Magic Square mixed in. Sideswipe is now significantly larger than Jazz. Jazz is about the same size as Cosmos. So the scales are really and truly not interchangeable across all scales, if that makes sense. The larger ones and the smaller ones you can begin to swap out, but when you get into that middle gray area, it starts to fall apart.
All right, so let's get into it. Now, before we do, first and foremost, let me say I firmly believe that scale is in the eye of the beholder. Transformers animation was all over the place, and we all saw these characters differently. The one that constantly gets in people's way is Grimlock. The DX9 Grimlock is right on the money. Right in the scale chart, sits perfectly where it should be. The knockoff oversized one is too big. But if you're like, no, that's how I view him, that's how I want, that's perfectly valid. Just know, if we're agreeing that this is the scale that we are following, it's incorrect. You are incorrect. Doesn't make your preference wrong, just makes it incorrect. And that's okay. It's your money, you can spend it however you want. But what have we learned from this? What we have learned is that all of those companies are pretty much making their own scale. Nothing is 100% perfect. Every single one of them is pretty much abiding by their own guidelines. And within those guidelines, some of them aren't perfect to begin with. Bumblebee from New Age, a little too tall, but would you want him any shorter? He's a little fella. You'd lose him if he got any smaller. Unique Toys doesn't quite fit in with anything. If you kind of squint and look at it, you can make it work. DX9 newer stuff fits in with its own stuff. It also fits in with New Age if you want it to, but it doesn't do it perfectly, but it's close enough. Magic Square does its own thing, fits within itself pretty well. The question comes down to, can you cross over between brands and make it work if you're trying to stay true to the scale chart? And my simple answer to it is yes. How? By picking a scale within it and going with it. What do I mean by that? Let's say you're going Magic Square. You want Magic Square Leader class figures, you want Magic Square Voyager class figures, all the big stuff you want Magic Square. I don't think that's the wrong choice. I think that's actually a pretty good choice. And then for the stuff under that, you could go New Age or you could go DX9. The problem comes in when you're going within the smaller scales within the same guidelines. So the car bots from each obviously don't match. We see that with Sideswipe and Jazz. There's no more room for debate. It's over. Jazz works with Bumblebee, but so does Magic Square Sideswipe. But Magic Square Sideswipe doesn't necessarily work with New Age Jazz. Simultaneously, if we go between scales, New Age Jazz doesn't really match up with Magic Square Huffer. If you want the scale chart to kind of play a part in how you build your Legends collection, you can do it, and you can do it by switching over between companies. You just have to pick a path for the specific color code, and then maybe the one below or the one above, but that's where it gets tricky. Bumblebee works. In my mind, not all of the Legends class figures are kind of the same, you know what I mean? But the point is, if you want the scale to make some sort of sense in relation to the Sumbo chart, you can't just pick between the 2 or 3 or 4 brands willy-nilly, because it's going to look like a mess. If you don't care and you just want a representation of the character on a shelf and have them all be little and varying kind of degrees of little, then fine, you can do whatever you want. But the scales don't match up perfectly. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating because New Age is really the monkey wrench. DX9 and Magic Square stuff kind of works. The primes are very similar. We're going to forget about Cyclonus and them, that's off. The cup kind of moves over. The RC kind of moves over. A lot of that stuff kind of goes back and forth. We already showed how Iron Factory sort of matched up with DX9 as well. So everything was kind of on the same trajectory. Magic Square was a little bigger, but it worked. New Age changed it. Changed the game. It made the scale different. The proportions are different. The builds are different. Like, it's different. Once that happened, you kind of have to be a bit more selective if you want the entirety of your Legend scale collection to make sense. People get upset with me when I talk about this stuff because they want it to all work, so they get mad at me as if it's my opinion. It's not my opinion. These are facts. So I'm really doing this. I have no skin in this game. I don't have a dog in the fight. I'm really doing this as a courtesy. I'm doing this as a tool for you guys that are collecting Legends to use in the sense of building your collections, because it's tricky. And from a glance, from afar, it seems like it all works. But when you get up close to it, it doesn't. If the chart is what you're going for. Hope that helps. Good luck to all you Legends collectors out there. It's your time. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.